This is JWT2 Learning Theories with a specific emphasis on this PowerPoint on instructional design. So what is instructional design? It's exactly what it says. It's design-oriented teaching for the acquisition of knowledge. In this, you determine the goals, the objectives, and you do that within a given instructional environment. And part of this design includes identifying where the learner is at their current learning needs and the best methods by which to aid the students in achieving those objectives. Within this context, you have to know the school setting. I am in a rural, low SES community, very small. It's an elementary and middle school. It's pre-K to 8. It's about 240 students. Also, we're going to be learning about instructional design through the eyes of a 7th grade ELA lesson plan and a 1st grade math lesson plan. In the 7th grade lesson, there's the regular education teacher who also teaches grades 6 to 8 ELA. Title I resource teacher who comes in for about 30 minutes 3 times a week. There are 24 students with 1 gifted, and there are no ELLs. And the pods are in pods of 5. The 1st grade math lesson has a regular education teacher who teaches multi-subjects. There's a Title I resource teacher as well who comes in for 30 minutes for 2 times a week. There are 23 students in this class with 2 SPED and 1 ELL. The students are grouped in pods of 4. The main model is the ADDIE model. A little bit of background on it. The military contracted Florida State to construct this. It's actually the origin of all the future models that we'll talk about later on in the PowerPoint. While some people criticized it for being linear, more recent users have made it more cyclical. And this is how it would look using a diagram. The first part of it would be analysis. That's where you make your goals and objectives, see if they're mastered or not mastered. You're really talking about the learner and how you're going to instruct. Analysis of both of those parts. You also anticipate any problems. Will there be available financing, like if you need certain books to complete the assignment, or if you'll have enough time during the period to complete it. Do you have the right materials? In regard to learners' needs assessments, you'll need to pre-test and determine the level or background knowledge of your students. You might want to also find out what their styles are, motivations, and you'll want to be cognizant of whether there are ELL students there and SPED students there. Your delivery options are also important. In other words, what methods will you use? What instructional strategies will you use? What resources do you need? Do you need online? Do you need visual aids? And that brings us to design. The design assessments include formative and summative assessments. Formative means they're completed throughout the whole assignment. Summative is basically where they are at the conclusion. The next piece of the design is the context. Really, you'll want to try to teach or do the new knowledge as close to the actual setting as possible. You also want to know whether you're going to be using whole group, small group, or one-to-one instruction. You allow extra practice time because that's very important for students to have time to really use their knowledge so that it's embedded and they've actually learned it and not memorized it. So you also outline the strategies and their sequence of the strategies. What content should be addressed, and relate that back to the objectives. The next part is the development part. You may want to make an example lesson. Of course, if you've done this lesson many times before, as many teachers have, you may have kind of an idea about what the lesson should already be and time-wise and the materials. But every now and then you'll find a class that's different and you want to take that into account. So you may want to run through that, make any suggestions for changes, and you may want to allow a little extra time sometime depending upon what you found out so far about the class. Next will be implementation. Since you will have a Title I teacher in there with you, you want to make sure they know how to conduct any assessments you might be doing, what lessons you'll need to be working on, and what their part or role might be. You also want to arrange the class setup. I told you 7th grade is in pods and the 1st grade's in pods, so you want to be prepared for that. You want to include formative evaluation throughout the instruction and supply with corrective feedback to the students immediately so they can make changes to their lesson to further their knowledge and to really embed that new knowledge in their minds. You also want to check out any functionality of equipment, of course, to make sure it's working that particular day. The E for ADDIE is evaluation. And you will have both formative and summative evaluations. Did the students learn those objectives that you had at the very beginning, or do you need to make some changes? You have attitudes questionnaires, performance assessments, and they might even be criterion referenced. So now we're ready to talk more about instructional design models. We've already talked about ADDIE. Merrill's first principle of instruction, we'll talk about that later because that's going to be our main focus. But some other ISD models are 4CID, that's by Jerome von Murray-Bohr, and there are 4 components to his design: learning tasks, supporting information, JIT information, which means just in time, and part-time practice. Then we have the Dick and Carey model, which has 10 components, and it also has goals, objectives, learner analysis. You'll see most of these go back to the ADDIE model. We have ASSURE, that's similar to Gagne's 9 events of instruction, and like the ADDIE model, it's an acronym, and it stands for Analyze, Standards, Select the Strategies, Utilize Technology, Require Participation, and Evaluation. Then we have Kemp's instructional design. It was originated by Gerald Kemp, and it has 9 components. It's a cyclical model of planning, designing, development, assessment. Then we have Kirkpatrick's 4 levels of training evaluation, and it was developed by Donald Kirkpatrick, and it also has 4 levels: reactions, learning, transfer, and results. And some people also include the ARCS model in here, which is basically a model of motivation. It was developed by John Keller, and the ARCS model is an acronym for attention, relevance, confidence, and satisfaction. As I mentioned before, we would talk about Merrill's first principles later. Here's an overview of that etiology by M. David Merrill. And this learning is related to how the strategies are applied using real-world tasks. The implementation can be done, though, using any delivery system. It's prescriptively designed so that the ultimate goal is integration of the new knowledge, again, into the real world. The foundation for learning here is based on the student's prior knowledge, and any new knowledge must first be demonstrated by someone else. This is task-based, which is similar to the problem to be solved in other etiologies. And in this task, you show the whole task, that's demonstrated first, and also the students are told the objectives. As you can see, there are 4 principles: activation, demonstration, application, and integration, all centered around this task. In the activation phase, there's development of an organized structure for learning information. For example, in the ELA 7th grade lesson plan, there's a KWL chart, and that provides some structure for the students' learning. There's examination of students' current knowledge, which allows for early diagnosis of any learning problems the students may currently have. It also enables correction of those misconceptions before you even start the lesson. Prior relevant experience is also important, and it's also motivational to show what students already know and connect it to that. There's shared experience of peers in this, and it serves to stimulate recall for the other students as well when they're able to interact. The next phase is demonstration, and it's very much stressed in this model as opposed to just telling the information. The demonstration must be consistent with the objectives. Also, you should provide multiple representations of the task. You might use examples, non-examples, different procedures, visualizations, modeling, multimedia, computer lessons, and it guides students toward portraying the relevant information when you demonstrate this. Peers can also demonstrate. As a matter of fact, they can collaborate these portrayals of the new information to one another. And again, this gives students more motivation when they have a peer doing this with them. The next phase is the application phase. And it has to be consistent with the objectives. You use the new knowledge to solve real-world problems, as we've already mentioned. And during this application of the new knowledge for real-world problems, they may predict outcomes using the new information to show that they're able to apply it. They may find some faulty conditions based upon new knowledge to let the teacher know that they are really being able to apply this. And you also have to provide multiple opportunities for these students to use this new information. They also should progressively apply it to harder tasks. That's very important in Merrill's first principles. You also should be giving the students feedback and coaching during this time. Matter of fact, it should be ongoing corrective feedback throughout the phases. This makes it intrinsic motivation so that the consequences relate to the actions. They learn their own errors and are able to recognize those and correct them. And that's where you also may use any recovery methods students may have learned to correct their own mistakes. This also, during this time, is scaffolding, instruction, and coaching. And as the students use this new knowledge to progress onto harder tasks, as I mentioned before, then the coaching is diminished and the student takes more responsibility for his work. The last phase is the integration phase. And again, you use the knowledge in the real world. There are opportunities to display this knowledge in classroom, in the community, opportunities for personal use of the knowledge, and that students become reflective in their learning. They have learned the ability to summarize the new knowledge. They have an ability to collaborate with their peers. They defend, modify, create new knowledge from it. And they may learn how to monitor their own progress, which would be very indicative of integration. Learning styles. In regard to learning styles, which are very important when you're trying to teach a lesson, you need to be cognizant of that. We're talking about ELA grade 7 lesson plan that is attached. Here's an overview of that on using a KWL chart to cite text evidence, of course, which is a common core goal and objective. The dominant styles, learning styles that we will be talking about are visual verbal and auditory verbal. Motivation is increased through their own personal knowledge of their learning styles. Maybe you gave a learning style inventory and then went over that with the students to let them know what their particular style is so that they can be knowledgeable about which strategy would be the best to use when referencing their own learning style. So visual verbal, the activation of prior knowledge by recalling mental pictures. They also transfer those visual images to written forms, like maybe using journaling or taking notes. You might use pictures, media, images, organizers, colored highlighters, flashcards. And in the lesson plan I told you about previously, the students went on a field trip to a pioneer farm. They may have taken pictures on those field trips and now may be asked to write an essay about the topic or use post-it notes to view in common places to help them remember. You might use a blackboard or overhead projector to list the directions of that 7th grade lesson plan. They might even use computers to type up their notes. They also might read newspaper headings and captions for real-world tasks and personal use of knowledge. And if you see down at the bottom left corner, I have a picture of a relevant real life newspaper during the 1800s that students you might use to do main ideas, details, to color with highlighters. So you might insert those images also into match reading passages, and you will limit the information though per page. You could incorporate use of graphic organizers, which is what you see there, the KWL chart, or you might use a T-chart. You use various colored highlighters for studying the textbooks, and you can use those to signify main ideas and details or headings to build that structure we talked about for learning, which is again the activation phase that we're talking about. You might use flashcards for vocabulary. Any of those would be applicable for nonverbal, visual nonverbals. They also like illustrations and color and visual aids and charts and graphs and diagrams. And they may also like maps for multiple representations that we talked about earlier on Merrill's principle to obtain knowledge. Visual nonverbals also prefer symbols and pictures rather than writing words as the visual verbal does. Labeling and circling of answers and essays can also be used, and you can also see that how you can apply that in the lesson plan. Images or use of a pointer with the oral directions is also applicable. Use of computers to chat about or have online discussions or watch accompanying animation for reading passages, and peer sharing and demonstration of skills, those are all applicable. Tactile, kinesthetic learners, they need actions, gestures, dance, role-playing. Verbs and parts of speech on ELA could lend themselves to actions and role-playing. At the end of that lesson plan, there is a piece where the more advanced learners can do role-playing of some pioneer farm incident. You could also use sentence strips to organize main ideas and details so that they're able to move those pieces around. And then there's auditory verbal. Auditory verbals benefit from the oral language format. You use recordings, songs, mnemonics to aid in recall and activation of prior knowledge. Read orally or record directions of the reading passages, or you could record them online for the students to listen to. Songs and mnemonics such as fanboys for coordinating conjunctions, for, and, nor, but, or, yet, so would also be helpful. Use voiceovers or sound effects would be useful. And there you see the use of the tape player as I was discussing. Processing and following auditory directions. You can use the recorder as I was explaining. You can listen to whole or small group discussions, and that can serve as a means of feedback and correction and verbalizing solutions to problems with others in the group. And again, that's also visible in the lesson plan when we use group work and when we were using the KWL chart. Students gathered together to discuss the citation of evidence and whether or not there was proof for that citation. You could also use earphones or CDs. The teacher can repeat the knowledge orally to solidify its integration. Might have to repeat it 2 or 3 times for auditory learners, but that's their preferred method. So, using storytelling for elaboration or sequencing, it's possible. If you look over on the right of the PowerPoint, the problems that the pioneers faced with the pictures matching the descriptions of winter and spring. It might be that you have students in groups elaborating and sequencing those events for spring, summer, fall, winter, or retelling their own story based upon what they saw at the Pioneer Farm. Two things I would like to add on the learning styles is the demonstration phase for Merrill's principles of the whole task. In that ELA lesson plan, the teacher does demonstrate how to do a KWL chart, even though the students have done it several times. You will want to make sure again that students' analysis of their current learning, there will be some that don't know how to do it. And the second part is that the connection to real-world tasks. Attached is a map of Mary Draper's Ingalls, who was a real pioneer girl who was captured by the Indians, and a marker for Mary Draper Ingalls. And you could use that for students to generate questions to one another and use that marker for a citation of text evidence for a real-world task. All right, introductory level to mastery level using Merrill's principles. An overview of mastery level is rooted in work from Benjamin Bloom, and it has a combination of tutoring and one-on-one instruction to get from introductory to mastery level. It has as its foundations allowance for extra learning time, using multiple representations to get at mastery learning. And one of the things that's foundational also is determining the student beginning levels. And you can see how all this relates back to Merrill's first principles of instruction. Because you do need their beginning level, and you do have to have students assessed. That might be informative, like for pre-test, teacher observation. Might be informal. You might use little quizzes. You might use the lab. Brief written quizzes, oral assessments, performances such as role plays, and this includes input by the Title I's resource personnel, who's also well versed on the requirements that the teacher has laid out and the objectives and goals for the students to learn. The students are provided feedback on their current functioning and capabilities, again like in Merrill's first principles, where they're divided ongoing feedback and correction. There's frequent monitoring of progress for students and possible reappraisal of the curriculum, even for those that it is an unusual year, that students don't necessarily start out where the teacher has found that in years past that current level of functioning is for the class. Also, you've given multiple opportunities for assessment when the students are ready. There might not necessarily students giving the assessments at the same time, because each one will arrive at mastery at different places. It also allows for early warnings for failure, so it avoids those larger gaps that might come later by them not learning by the correction of the small errors earlier. There's mastery of objectives, and is usually set at 90% accuracy, although it can be less. Students progress from one level to the next. This introductory level to mastery learning is especially useful for slower learners. Those students achieving mastery, it's found that they spent more time on task. Also, this is going to reduce the achievement gaps among students, because now, hopefully, all will achieve mastery. And the common quote for mastery learning is, "Time is variable, learning is the constant." You also want to use the appropriate materials and environment to complete the learning tasks. And if it's a huge, big, school-wide mastery learning program, you'll want to have staff buy-in so that every teacher is willing to participate. There's also active learning involved by the students. Very important. In this mastery learning, you review student portfolios for assessment of their current mastery levels. You might use a rubric of the necessary criterion for meeting the objectives for below level, on level, and above mastery level students. Again, you identify the goals and the objectives based on student needs, just like in Merrill's First Principles, but you might use maybe even as few as 3 criterion items, although a few more might be recommended, but you have to have at least 3. So, for Merrill's First Principles, activation of recall of previous information for the ELA on the KWL chart, text citation. They have had these things in previous years, so you want to activate that knowledge to increase their motivation to continue on. And there's a reminder then of the student's recent completion of KWL chart in the lesson plan. For activation of prior knowledge about the field trip we talked about on the Pioneer field trip, maybe other settings, they may have seen something on TV. Past assignments they may have done maybe in social studies class or other content areas. You also will ask them to recall the rules for group dynamics when the Title I teacher is available when you're doing group work. So you might discuss that in the groups, what's required to complete this new KWL chart. You review past student assessment rubrics to configure the groups, whether you want to differentiate instruction according to levels. Might be a great idea for introductory level students and those that have already mastered and need to advance to the next level. Students are that way, and students then become prepared for what is expected of them for completion. Next is demonstration. Demonstration of the whole task for the objective is very important in Merrill's Principles. So you show students a teacher completed KWL chart. You might show them how to complete each part using a nonfiction passage for text citation, and you may use the page numbers such as was on the previous slide on learning styles. You allow time for Title I resource input from observations she's made or is making on the spot. You should also give consideration to students' learning styles as to how they prefer presentation of material. So, like you might want to have pictures for visuals, or allow those of auditory style to whisper read nonfiction passages out loud before they complete the chart. And the teacher should also be cognizant of particular problem areas, again shown over time. So the application phase. Again, we'll complete the KWL chart. That's how they apply the knowledge that you've already had using a nonfiction reading passage. So they fill out the appropriate parts about the pioneer settlers. The group reads parallel pioneer passages of varying paragraphs and readability. So you may have on level, below level, and above level reading passages depending upon the assessment you've done of the learners previously. That way you won't be giving a very easy passage to an advanced learner and vice versa. So the difficulty is based upon formative assessments that we examined earlier. So you should allow extra time for those below mastery to reduce time later as their confidence is built up. Also, you should provide opportunities for progression of the skills, tasks, and be consistent with it so students know ahead of time what's going to be accepted, what's not going to be accepted, and what they need to do to master that skill. Students are to cite what they've learned next on the KWL chart and the page numbers and paragraph numbers in the final portion of the chart, while the teachers are monitoring the group discussions and providing individual feedback and coaching with that, giving that just-in-time correction. Students then will complete another chart while the teachers monitor the group. Students complete another chart using a newspaper article to allow for multiple representations and real-world skill application. So those at mastery level or above may have diminished coaching here, leaving the teacher time to focus on other students. If additional time for mastery is needed, the students may attend after-school tutoring so that their learning basically is somewhat self-paced. During the last phase, on the integration and motivation phase, the students are told that Mary Draper Ingalls was a real pioneer woman. And they make a KWL chart of that. What they knew about her before, what they want to know about her, and what they want to learn. And what they actually did learn after they read the passage. Students are then shown a real pioneer roadside marker, as mentioned before, to read to complete the last part of the KWL chart. Or the students may choose to research the internet for information to finish the chart, citing the article from which it was retrieved. Or they may write paragraphs to summarize the evidence. Or students may compose questions and trade with other students to answer about what evidence they cited. Or students compose the questions using the map of her trail to trade and answer, which is especially motivational because she lived in Virginia. After all that is completed, the cycle is repeated for both first principles and mastery learning once the students achieve mastery and citation of evidence based on the rubric. On this slide, we're going to be talking about scaffolding, and I'm going to provide you with a general overview. This is a term that was coined by Jerome Bruner. In scaffolding, the students are instructed within their zone of proximal development, or ZPD. This was an idea developed by Lev Vygotsky, and it's the area between what a child knows and does not know, moving from the known to the unknown. So that's the optimal area for a teacher or another student. It does not necessarily have to be a teacher, but it has to be some knowledgeable other that can help that student advance with just a little help. The zone is determined in part by the teacher giving probing and delving questions, and it's also aided by discovery. You also might have multiple points of view there, use of real tasks, and social interaction. Peers also may learn from feedback from the other peers, as in Merle's first principles. Sharing of information, again, from a knowledgeable other can help move a student on. After a student does master a task, they progress on to the next harder task. And I think you can see that from the size of the P, which would stand for a problem, or in this case, a whole task for Merrill's first principles, and get progressively harder. On the lower end, on the left side, temporary supports would be used there until the students can own or integrate their own learning. These supports are needed when students are not advancing. Coaching and mentoring there for each problem is decreased as the students become more proficient. Scaffolding is often done with one student, but it can also be done with more than one. Several scaffolds may be needed for difficult content. When you scaffold, you move from foundational knowledge to a new task using a scaffold to new knowledge without a scaffold. Then you're ready to move on to a harder task. There are basically three kinds of scaffolds: verbal, procedural, and instructional. In verbal scaffolds, you might have definitions, examples, non-examples. You might use elaboration, songs, mnemonics. You might give hints, facial or hand gestures. You might prompt the students or give an explanation. You might give them cues or use think-alouds or even praise and encouragement. Procedural scaffolds might include modeling, one-on-one mentoring, think, pair, share, group work, SQP2 RS, or you can even use a dictogloss, especially for ELL students. Instructional scaffolds may include visual aids, charts, graphic organizers, and materials. So more about scaffolding using a little different graphic, and I think you can see that it is more detailed, and this is called a task here, which fits in more with Merrill's first principles. And you see coaching is at the left-hand side of a bigger triangle, and as the tasks are learned, the coaching is diminished at the lower end of the triangle near the right. As simultaneously, the tasks are getting harder, and you can see again the circles are getting bigger. So it's easy to see how coaching is diminished while the tasks get harder as students begin to get confidence in themselves, as they begin to understand the underlying foundational knowledge to build on. So first we're going to talk about the activation, which is appropriate for first principles. You might use a rubric to reveal the objectives, and let's say we were using the ELA lesson for 7th grade with the visit of a field trip to a pioneer farm. But you take that and you remind them about that, and you take this rubric with the objectives on it and show the students what they need to be learning for that knowledge. Students then become motivated because they already possess some knowledge of the new skill. So they're actually increase in their belief that they can do this task. Previous knowledge provides a framework for the future knowledge then. You may allow think, pair, share talk of the pioneer farm for social interaction learning. Next would come the demonstration phase, which is also, again, appropriate for first principles. And you model that whole task with an example. And if you look on this slide, number 1 shows the demonstration of the first task. And that would be the whole task. Then for number 2, you see they teach the task component skills. And number 3, they show the application of the components to the task, which we will talk more about in just a minute. So they demonstrate the whole task with an example. They might use a visual aid to explain how to complete that KWL chart we talked about for text citation that was mentioned earlier. The teacher's awareness of text citation areas of difficulty from their past instruction may also be useful because she knows where scaffolds might need to be placed. Also, she can help the students break those difficult tasks into smaller parts by showing each part of the KWL organizer and specific examples of text citation. And you see that in number 2 on the slide, teach the task component skills. They may also pre-teach any unfamiliar pioneer vocabulary such as Homestead Acts, and they might use pictures if you want to bring in students' learning styles, if that's appropriate. For application phase, the teacher gives the students the new KWL chart and the reading passage. The students may discuss it, but notice that they have to now defend or possibly compare their own charts using text citation evidence and support that to their peer. And in return, the peer may give them encouragement and praise, which will cause the student to continue with that appropriate response. Again, a peer, a more knowledgeable other, is helping to help that student to progress. The teacher may also complete one KWL chart for the whole group while using cues, prompts, and questions to help those students summarize the information, which is a very good indicator of application skill. One of the things here that I think is very much needed in the lower grades, but in the upper grades too because you're pressed for time, but to use wait time as a scaffold as needed. Too many times we don't give students time to think. Also, during the application phase, you diminish the coaching as students assume responsibility for their own error correction and their own skill mastery, which we mentioned before. The last phase is the integration phase, and that's, while not depicted on this slide, integration is understood to have been accomplished, though, because in step 3, students are allowed to move forward. As you can see there, show application of the components to the task, and in step 4, it says demonstrate the second task. So students are allowed to move forward there, again, to a harder task. This encourages, also you should encourage the use of citation of evidence, maybe in social studies class, or reading magazines or newspapers. That would certainly show how this new knowledge is being integrated into real-world tasks. Students are also ready for this cycle to progress using a slightly harder task, but similar in nature, which is very important in Merrill's principles and in scaffolding as well. This second cycle is repeated using the new skill knowledge as the foundation for the next text, and so on. So now that we've discussed instructional design theory, and I've showed you what you can do in the middle school using that 7th grade ELA lesson on text citation and KWL charts, I'd like to also show you that it can be used in any grade level in any content area. So we're going to move to a math grade 1 lesson, of which you will have a copy of the lesson plan, and it's about addition, fluency to 20 from the Common Core standards for math. So let's talk about activation, and you can see that we still have the 4 principles around a problem, or Merrill would call it a task, but we also have a little different graphic this time, and that we've added motivation, interaction, navigation, and collaboration, because those are also important aspects of these phases. So first we're going to talk about activation. If we relate this to kindergarten blocks using the multifix cubes, adding of 2 digits like 4 plus 1 is 5, then the students can relate that to their prior learning and be more motivated to learn, because they'll already see they do have used this before and they do know a little bit about it. However, I would like to say the more recent prior knowledge that you can activate is the best. Also, during activation phase, you want to talk about the objective, which in this case is for fluency of sums to 10. And we're going to add the commutative property, because that is a way that you can obtain fluency, is by understanding that 4 plus 5 is 9 and 5 plus 4 is 9. You also should allow students to explore manipulatives using basic addition to stimulate their motivation, because at this age students are moving from concrete to the abstract, so we'll use the manipulatives first. And in this case, there might be pairs of students that construct the multifix cube, and they may tell their addition problems. So pair discussion, and again, on the little graphic interaction, you can see that that's important there. So also in this lesson plan, students, the teacher walks around, making notes to determine students' readiness, as well as the Title I resource teacher, if she is available in this math class a few days a week. And in this way, again, we're doing student analysis to know where the starting point is. One of the things the teacher may use is, if she's taking into account learning styles, is to use this kinesthetic example of crisscrossing your arms. So we take each multifix cube, and you might have 4 in one hand of one color and 5 in one hand of the other color, and connect them and say 4 plus 5 is 9. You may disconnect them and then crisscross your arms and say 5 plus 4 is 9. And as you do that, you may say the words flip it to give a visual aid. So we got auditory example by saying flip it, using kinesthetic meaning crisscross arms, by crisscrossing the arms, and using a visual aid for the visual learners. You could also give a non-example of when you wouldn't be able to flip it. For example, or you wouldn't need to flip it, I should say, because if you have 5 plus 5 is 10, flipping it does not change. You still have 5 plus 5 is 10, so you're really only learning one fact there. Identifying terms of sum and add-in from kindergarten may also help activate prior knowledge and pre-teach some vocabulary. The next phase is demonstration, and in that, of course, you model the whole task. So you might use fingers to add sums to 10, and then flip your fingers or crisscross your arms, showing the commutative property. For multiple representations, you might use 10 frames for a demonstration with 5 on top, 4 on the bottom, and then switch it, 4 on top and 5 on the bottom. So the important point here is teacher awareness of the best strategy for modeling based on her years of experience, and knowing that concrete is very important here. You might do kinds of practice for Merrill's principle that allows for identification of new examples. The commutative property objective affords an organizing structure for the future learning of algebra. So that's very important. Moving on to the application phase. In our school, we have Math, Facts, and a Flash by Renaissance Learning, that computer program. And so we could use that for more practice of how to practice, because students need extra practice if they're already having problems. And again, that's where the scaffolding comes in, because that's when you want to use that for a student that is not quite where we need them to be. Or you could use, for a multiple medium, you could use a number line for practice, 5 plus 4, 4 plus 5. So just make sure the practice is consistent with the objectives that you want accomplished. And how to practice allows those learners to do the whole task. Student and teacher feedback ensures success during collaborative groups. So again, you're making sure that scaffolding's in place by a more knowledgeable person, but you're also using cooperative learning strategies. As mastery is observed, then again the facilitation is diminished. Positive consequences will result in higher motivation. And again, you may want to do praise and encouragement. On the final phase, integration, you may add the sides of dominoes, or maybe 2 dice to play games with, or construct student-generated word problems for use of the new knowledge to play games in a real-world context, because again, that's one of the things Merrill's principle is based on. Students see a purpose in the objective, and therefore they're going to have greater involvement, and will result in longer periods of time. Then, if they're given larger numbers, the students will be able to predict that the process will not change. If it's 1 million plus 2 million, you can switch it, and 2 million plus 1 million is the same. And kids really enjoy that because it makes them think that they're doing something really advanced. So, then once these integration is achieved, the cycles are repeated with progressively harder tasks. While we have very few ELL students in our school, you can also still use these principles using the lesson plan with math for grade 1. The activation phase, again, you're going to review the sums to 5 using multifix cubes to stimulate the recall of information. And you're going to still use pre-assessment that's completed, including informal, maybe observation, or textbooks may have such pages as show what you know, and that helps you diagnose the need for intervention by just doing a few problems. It also encompasses necessary prerequisite skills. So, especially for ELL, you want to assess that math vocabulary knowledge. And you can do that by a simple thumbs up or thumbs down if they can identify a facts family, or thumbs up or thumbs down for symbols like add or equals. They may also just draw you a picture or make a model. But first you should determine if they can even count the cubes, because kids that are English language learners may not have picked that up in kindergarten. It doesn't mean they're slower intellectually, they just are impaired by the language barrier. So first principles is prescriptive, and that with a set number of items missed, that's what determines intervention in our particular math book for Houghton Mifflin if you do the show what you know pages. Using those results, the teacher or the textbook identifies specific activities or pages to help the students succeed. The Houghton Mifflin Harcourt Math has an online intervention program called Soar to Success, and that can be completed in Spanish even to overcome that language barrier. You should also check their comprehensible input. Students have to know what the crux of being said. This should be done when taught relevant words or slightly more difficult than the current level of knowledge. So they need to know the crux of what you're wanting. The demonstration phase should of course explain the whole task of switching 2 add-ins to make the same sum. Keep the words to a minimum in the directions. Pre-teach any unknown and familiar vocabulary, like maybe read the math words, and again have them give the thumbs up for the ones that are addition words. You could also match words and symbols with labels. You could use picture cards during this phase, like make number sentences with cards and finish by saying in all or all together. Graphic organizers are helpful, like you could use a word web with the word addition in the middle. And questioning strategies, and the next slide will give an example of that. Semantic maps, T-scopes for same and different sort for sums of varying problems. But first, make sure that they even know what the terms mean by same and different, like use girl, boy, thumbs up, thumbs down, red, blue, circle, square, because how can you do the abstract of knowing that these numbers are same or different, sums are different, if you don't even know what same and different means? Also give them multiple opportunities to use the language, for them to use the language. Advanced ELL students can peer tutor others, like using cooperative learning techniques or small groups. And you can model the usage of mnemonics or jingles such as, if you want to rearrange, the sum doesn't change. Using gestures and repeat the problems are helpful. Again, crisscrossing your arms and repeat problems to show the students for the beginning ELL ones. Gesture with no repeating for intermediates. And in groups, the advanced students can describe the process in short sentences on how to flip the add-ins. So it's kind of a low ELL student, a medium ELL student, and advanced ELL student. In a way, it's similar to mastery learning. During the application phase, you can check for transference of knowledge by saying how words are related. Like you can use the terms addition, add or sum, all together, in all, and so on. You can use math talks. You can use the questions out of the text to give students a chance to verbalize their understanding. This provides teachers with the opportunities for feedback and just-in-time corrections for these students. You can use the dictogloss we talked about, or TPR, to recreate stories involving addition. There are small groups that can summarize their learning. And the focus is on accuracy of the math concepts and not on the student's grammar. On the integration phase, which of course is the fourth phase, you can use the new math skills in the real world. You can use them in games. In Common Core, first grade does not deal as much with the money anymore, except in real world context. But you could say like a quarter and a dime are used to buy a slushie, and a student turns the coins around for commutative property for the purposes of this assignment. You can extend the new knowledge to parent-child involvement, like a homework assignment to show the parents the new knowledge to get praise from them. You could also here use summative assessments to make sure the students are where they need to be. After that, all that's completed, you start the second cycle of more difficult tasks. This graphic organizer is just an example of what I was talking about previously about using them for ELL students, about in particular what is a sum, and then you can see what it means, what's it look like, and examples of each. This concludes this PowerPoint of instructional design theory, using in particular Merrill's first principles of instruction. But you can see very easily how it can be used for ELL students. Use it for mastery learning. It can also be used for learning styles to help incorporate them into your instruction. But it's very prescripted and organized, and in particular, as the title implies, very design oriented from start to finish. And I hope this was helpful to you. Thank you.